Welcome to the Holistic Psychiatrist Podcast, a place for inspiration, insight, and information on holistic mental health. Join your host, Dr. Alice Lee, and discover critical information on safe, effective psychiatric medication withdrawal. Explore new ideas that enlighten and expand the mind with cutting-edge authors and experts, along with former patients as they share their miraculous healing journeys. It's time to build your well-being from the thought up. It's time for the Holistic Psychiatrist Podcast. Here's your host, Dr. Alice Lee.
Hello and welcome to the Holistic Psychiatrist Podcast, a place for building well-being from the thought up. I'm your host, Dr. Alice Lee, the holistic psychiatrist practicing in Salt Lake City, Utah. For more information about my work and for free healing recordings, please check out my website, holisticspsychiatrist.com. And I want to thank you so much for listening today. Today, our podcast is entitled Beyond the Carousel of Medications and Mainstream Narratives of Mental Health. And we'll be spotlighting Jupiter Leone, who spent 23 years on a psychiatric carousel of medications for depression, anxiety, and ADHD. In addition, she experienced countless psychotherapy sessions to heal her low self-esteem, fears, and emotional highs and lows. When she began her holistic healing journey with me, she was taking a benzodiazepine, a mood stabilizer, a stimulant, as well as ketamine, marijuana, and psilocybin. In a few months, she was able to come off her medications feeling physically and mentally stronger than she had ever felt, and more stable and calm than she envisioned possible. Therapeutic issues that previously resisted psychotherapeutic interventions quickly resolved through energy healing techniques. And in this podcast, Jupiter will share her wonderful healing progress over just a few months of treatment. Thanks for being here today, Jupiter.
I'm so excited. I'm very excited.
Yeah. I'm excited that you're excited to be here. And it's really wonderful that we've reached this place where you can really share your wonderful story that is hopefully going to reach a lot of people out there and give them the encouragement and hope that they desperately need. So let's just go ahead and let's start with a little bit about yourself. Tell us whatever you want to share about, who you are.
Okay. I'm going to be 50 in a year and a half, that is shocking to me. I'm just I don't feel that old, but I'm really about to hit half a century. I'm a really creative person. I've had a lifelong interest in writing and dance. I'm a writer. I also paint and draw, and I've dabbled in visual art. I have a master's degree in the social sciences, one in fiction writing, and a PhD in literature. I like to say I spent my 20s and part of my 30s collecting graduate degrees in psychiatric diagnoses. I've lived on the East Coast, the Gulf Coast. I currently live on the West Coast. I've done advocacy work for women writers and for people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And I've also had the opportunity to work on some large statewide mental health policy initiatives. I'm a queer lesbian. I use she, her pronouns. Been in partnership with an amazing person for the past 16 years. Mm-hmm. And this podcast has meant so much to me. And I want to give a shout out to all the people that have been on here before me who shared their stories, because I appreciate it so much. Listening to those stories gave me the courage I needed to reach out to Dr. Lee.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, stories is how we share information at the grassroots, because it's not going to come from the establishment mainstream, the changes that we want to create in this huge field that we call psychotherapy and psychiatry. So let's begin with a little bit of information about what types of conventional or traditional treatments that you've tried or experienced over the past years as you've worked on trying to heal underlying causes for the mental health symptoms that you were experiencing, so that other people can know what you were up against in the beginning.
Okay. Traditional psychotherapy. I have done internal, and it's 23 years, so this list is kind of long. Internal family systems therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, acupuncture, biofeedback. I spent 7 years in 12-step programs that I didn't really belong in, and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, of course, the traditional medication, psychopharmacology, interventions, right? Okay.
Yes.
What about hospitalizations or residential treatment? Did you actually experience that as well?
Yes, I've been in 3 hospitals in 3 different states. One that I'm just going to call it the place, was a residential treatment facility, but also, for the purposes of insurance, counted as a level 1 psychiatric facility, which I think is important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you've had a lot of different approaches and tried them over the years. And what were these approaches trying to help you with? What were some of the things that you presented as a problem for them?
From a young age, probably about 10, I had suicidal thoughts. But I was a reader. I was really perceptive of the people around me, and it wasn't really something I would ever do. And I knew not to bring this up to anyone, because I had a really strong sense, especially the older I got, of what kind of things might be set in motion if I told anyone with authority, like a teacher or something, what was going on in my head. Mm-hmm. And I managed to keep that under wraps until I was in my 20s, and I was in a PhD program. I was experiencing a lot of anxiety and I really wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know if I deserved that. I had a lot of conflict. I grew up with a lot of unearned advantages. And so I spent a lot of time thinking, does someone like me deserve to do this? I should have a life of service. But I was not really liking what I was doing in graduate school, trying to serve in the way that I thought that I should. So I showed up to therapy with a lot of anxiety after a kind of a weird, it wasn't even really a breakup, just a tiny little relationship thing that had really thrown me off. And I was like, I shouldn't be this upset. I just went on 2 dates. At this time I was still trying to date men. I just went on 2 dates with this guy, and I was freaked out about how upset I was. And I was an acupuncturist, and the acupuncturist said to me, there's a limit to what I can do. You need to go to therapy. So I showed up really with, I don't like how upset I am over just going on a couple dates with this person and him saying, I don't want to date you, how much this has thrown me off. And I'm really conflicted because I think ethically I should be having a life of service to make up for the advantages I've had, but I don't like this, and I keep trying to go right. So it was really a spiritual question, what I deserve, how do you make up for that kind of thing? And the therapist really wanted to work with early childhood stuff. And I'm an easily influenced person. So, during the first session, she had some ideas about my past that she didn't tell me. And I just kept seeing her because there was this relief of talking about all the pressures of my anxiety and relationships and friendships and how upset I would get. Because I was always thinking, this is not, other people aren't getting this upset. So 9/11 happened, and I lost my filter in terms of my suicidal thinking. Because I had worked with some people that worked before I went back to graduate school, I worked in finance, and I knew people in the Twin Towers, and that just impacted me, and I lost my filter. And so I started telling this therapist about my suicidal thoughts. And she got really anxious and immediately sent me to see a psychiatrist who said, it doesn't make any sense to me that you're this upset about 9/11, and just wanted to put me on meds. And I took Prozac and Celexa, And my body had a terrible response to both of them. I really think it was trying to protect me because I didn't want to take the meds this therapist was pushing me to. And I took a lot of notes while this was happening. And about a week after taking those meds, started waking up in the middle of the night with these like terrible scenes in my head of childhood abuse. And I would say, I don't think this is real. And the therapist would say, oh, you have to believe survivors, which you do have to believe survivors. But I was saying, I don't know if this really happened, and nobody wanted to hear that.
Were they visions or dreams, or what were they?
I think of them as like waking nightmares. I don't know if it was like full-on psychosis. I'm not sure where one draws the line, but it was just really intrusive things I couldn't stop thinking. And I would write it down and bring it to this therapist and read it aloud. And it was like the more I read it aloud, the more they showed up, and everything in them, she would say, really happened. And some of this stuff, there's just no way when you look at my, like it just couldn't have happened. But they wouldn't stop. And I couldn't function anymore. And so then she wanted to send me to a psych hospital, and I wouldn't go because I said the doors were locked. And I was, at this point, she had me convinced I just wasn't safe in my own hands with my own life. I had to be under 24 hours with people under watch, but I wouldn't go to the psych hospital because I didn't want to be locked up. That felt really scary to me. So she found this place in the West, and I hopped on a plane by myself and went there. And that was a terrible decision.
I see. Well, that does segue into our next question, which is, how did the treatment work? And maybe you can share with us why you thought it was a terrible decision to go into this very exclusive, I guess, hospital residential setting.
They had a particular way of understanding people's problems. And their model was, everything's caused by addiction. At that time, I didn't have any addictions. So they had to fit me into those categories. I took it's weird. It was it was very, very beautiful area. But I remember having to take this drug addict test and alcoholism test, and they took me into this trailer, and I had to fill out these tests, and they said, oh, you're in the 99th percentile for alcoholism and for drug addiction. And then they were into like love addiction and love avoidant, and I just kept getting these labels put on me and put on me and put on me so I would fit their narrative. And one of them was that this is weird because one of the founders of this place, I'm pretty sure she's a lesbian and has openly written about that, or one of the main faculty. But those famous people really there. And we had to do this thing called Survivors Week, where we all had to talk about any behavior from a caregiver that was less than nurturing. They counted as abuse. And I see this as having to fit us into a story, because everyone in there who showed up there wasn't abused. But if abuse is anything a caregiver has done that was less than nurturing, then everybody's abused. And actual abuse starts to lose meaning. But this nurse who was introducing, how we would fill out these worksheets with all our abuse, starts saying, if people don't want to hear this, but if you're gay, it's because you were molested as a child. And one man got up and left. He called a cab and just was like, nope, I don't need this because I am gay. I didn't have what it took to do that because I was so scared I was going to die, because everyone kept telling me I wasn't safe. Even though I didn't have a single suicide attempt or any self-injury at that point. I think context is really important. Like that place was 100 miles from a think tank that published a lot of fake science articles about saying that gay and lesbian and queer parents are dangerous. So I wonder, like, was that nurse connected to that org? But what happened there, I think of it in terms of the land. So this land was a former silver mine in this particular area of the country. And when you think about a mine, like how we mine for precious metal, you destroy everything to get to the one thing you want, which is that silver in the case of this land. And so I feel like people really, the level of my distress did not make sense with my biography. And we're in a particular system that is not willing to look to the spiritual or all sorts of other causes or to past lives. They're like, no, if you are this freaked out, there has to be some like really intense repressed memory. Mm-hmm. And they wanted a memory like that, and they kept pushing me to have one. So I finally did. And I was pushed by the other patients. I was pushed by the people there. I kept journals, and I can watch. I think the medication, so they would put me on Serzone, and so I was like increasing the dose the weeks I was there. I think that made things worse. And in the journal, I can see when I start to believe them, which is really painful. Because the first week, I'm like, I don't know about this. I don't like it here. I don't like this, what they're saying. And then I suddenly start to claim this identity that's not even based in reality. Yeah, it was. And then after I left there, I was so messed up. Within a couple more months, I was in another hospital.
I see. So the way I hear you is that sometimes when you go into a setting where the caregivers have a specific agenda and they impose it on other people rather than just sitting back and trying to learn what is going on, then it really distorts the whole healing process, because you're not really directing the treatment for the patient. It's the patient, fitting into your treatment.
Yeah. And I would say I think about the way doctors are trained and therapists are trained. And I think you've talked about Dr. Lee going to med school and early on them saying chiropractic is fake. Like there's this training to attend to certain information and ignore other things.
Right.
And that's not really listening or seeing a person. And I've met a lot of therapists and staff and doctors in my time, and there's maybe a handful of them who were out there to hurt people. That's the, like, in my experience, the minority of small, tiny minority. But the thing that comes to mind is when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
Like, I really believe everybody, like, not that nurse. Well, no, she thought she was helping us, I guess. They were trying to help, but they only had a hammer, and they've been taught to think in this really narrow way of like, there's one cause to one effect. You can't have multiple, like, sure, my history and the way I experience the world impacts my mental health. Absolutely. And sure, there's stuff going on in my biology and genes, but there's so much more than that. And there's no room for that in those spaces.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about my own experience where I felt also suicidal. While I was training at the University of Maryland, I really, I had been sleep deprived. It was about a year after my daughter was born. I was on call and also staying up at night trying to take care of an infant, and somehow they don't give you much in terms of help or support or acknowledge that having an infant during residency could be difficult on sleep, for example. But I felt suicidal because I was very unhappy in the program, and then they put me on Zoloft because they also got very anxious when I started saying that life wasn't worth living. I didn't want to stay in psychiatry. I wanted to leave psychiatry. And that was my introduction, I guess, to 5 years of being on Zoloft and discovering medication withdrawal and the effects of that when I try to come off. But I think this story that you've shared about your own personal experiences resonates for so many other people, because I remember a man who was a CEO of a large company, very successful, who was upset when he met someone who was impacted negatively by maybe some of his decisions, and they confronted him and he felt really upset because of that conversation. And when he went to, when he was ruminating or suffering from that, he went to a family physician and was put on an antidepressant. And then they tried to get him off the antidepressant in time and he couldn't sleep. And he ended up on an antipsychotic, a Zyprexa, which is one of the most heavy-duty antipsychotics out there for sleep, I guess. And his life was a mess after that. He couldn't work. And he came to see me to try to get help coming off of an antipsychotic, and I helped him get off of it. But I remember that he felt really stiff in his muscles, and the only thing that really helped him was 5-HTP, which is 5-hydroxytryptophan, which actually builds serotonin. So afterwards, I realized that he probably still had withdrawal symptoms, some kind of serotonin imbalance or dysfunction after years of coming off of the SSRI that he was put on, and then switched to Zyprexa for sleep. And that's why he did so much better with the final withdrawal process with 5-HTP. But these kind of interpretations of issues that need to be dealt with at a very human level are siphoned or moved into a path with medication. And once you go into that medication route, depending on the person's genetics and biochemistry, you can end up with a much more difficult problem than you started with, you know?
Yeah, amen to that. I mean, one of the diagnoses I collected was bipolar 2, which I doubt that type of behavior and issue would have expressed itself without all of the medications. Like, I've looked them up and they all can the ones I was on can cause mania, can cause intrusive thoughts. I mean, after I left that place, I probably was having mania. I mean, I would go out into the woods with these big sticks and hit the trees because I just was filled with all this intense energy. And I did end up at that hospital the therapist had wanted to send me to originally. At that point, it was mostly to get away from her because she was really invested in this particular story about me as a survivor in a way that I'm not. And I kept doubting it, and she didn't like that. And then also the boundaries got weird. She wanted me to pick her up from getting her car fixed. And she wanted to drive me to the hospital. When I got there, they pretty quickly figured out what was going on. And a psychiatrist there was like, why don't you just talk about things from your childhood that you remember? Let's not worry about all this. And that stopped the nightmares. Just getting to say like, well, these things happen and they're not they're not that bad. They just had a really strong impact on me. But the impact didn't fit my level of distress. And so the result of having an impact that didn't fit was that, I mean, they have a name for that. It's borderline personality disorder. And I feel like that stopped any thinking about what could be other possible causes for my distress.
I see.
It just became, like this circular logic of like, you're way more upset about stuff than people should be upset about stuff because you have borderline personality disorder. It's like a roadblock that just says, stop thinking, stop looking. Don't think about this anymore. And I do want to say something about Zyprexa.
Okay.
So I was put on one of those new antipsychotics a couple years ago that doesn't have any that doesn't stop mania, and it made me really manic. I mean, I woke up at 4 a.m. and I said, there is an evening star inside my heart. I am completely healed now. Wrote all of these emails, felt so good. And then it got bad and I needed something to stop it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, people have been suggesting Zyprexa for a long time, but I'd seen people in the hospital and what it did to them, and I didn't want anything to do with it. But at that point, I'd seen Lady Gaga on Oprah, and I thought, well, Lady Gaga takes Zyprexa, like, I can try this. Mm-hmm. I loved it. I was so calm. I didn't care about anything. Like all of the existential things that, like those questions that really matter, like, what do I want with my career? What do I want out of life? Like, how do I want to serve my community? How can I express who I really am? Didn't matter at all. Mm-hmm. I developed incontinence, and I thought, well, I'm 44. That's when these things happen. And luckily, my psychiatrist at the time was like, you do not need to be on this. Like, this was just to stop that reaction to the other medication. Like, you have to stop this. And I was like, no, I feel so good. So he started sending me PubMed articles about the chances that I would get diabetes from Zyprexa.
Uh-huh. Did you gain a lot of weight on Zyprexa?
Maybe just 5 or 10 pounds. I gained the most. Remeron, I gained 50 pounds. Yeah, but I'm grateful that because there are plenty of psychiatrists who would have been like, great, let's keep you on this. Like, but he was like, your like anxiety and distress is not worth the risk of this medication and what it will do to you. Because I think I was only on it for a month, but it was I've been on and off a lot of meds, and that was a really hard one to stop.
Well, so I think that was the effect that Zoloft actually had on me, was that I had a lot of angst. And the moment I took like 25 milligrams of Zoloft, none of it mattered anymore. Like, I didn't care.
But like, when you don't care about the things that are hard and hurt you, like, you lose access to the good things.
Exactly.
It's a terrible trade-off.
Yeah, there's a price to be paid for ignoring those concerns, let's just say.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's move on to your shift towards this kind of more holistic approach, because you've tried lots of different holistic approaches, and then we started working together. So tell us more about how things kind of moved in the right direction for you, and how is it different? I mean, you've tried so many different things. What happened to make this actually work for you?
I think of that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So, and it was a friend that sent me your podcast. I will never forget. I had it on in the car, and I heard your voice, and you were doing an EET and talking about the way energy medicine can support this process. And I had to pause it, and I just repeated everything you said. I was in the car driving going, I'm one with life energy the way a wave is one with the ocean. But it was months and months before I could contact you. But part of what set me on the right path, at a certain point, I started to seek out therapists who, I feel like I was seeking out people who had this unconscious need to rescue people and to have these really intense problems. And then I would, having the particular history I have, and like desire for attention, I would unconsciously become what they needed. And at a certain point, I finally started seeing people who had an unconscious, who just wanted me to get better. And I didn't know any of this was happening. Like, it's not, I don't know. It just is. But I had done a lot of work with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which had really given me a view into like what it meant to be in partnership with a therapist, to be really in it together and to feel more like an equal partner. And then over the course of the ketamine, I mean, I always knew this, but I became really aware that I had what in internal family systems they call unattached burdens. Other traditions call it negative entities or spirit possession. And I was aware of that I had hundreds of them. And my partner was reading a book by Bob Falconer called The Others Within Us, who he's an internal family systems practitioner that specializes in getting unattached burdens out of people. And he researched across the globe spirit possession. So she's reading this book and she was like telling me this stuff. And so I just look him up, email him, and we do a session and we get rid of those spirits. Mm-hmm. And I'd never been alone in my body. I was used to them. We had this weird kind of relationship, and I didn't talk about it because I was like, I don't need the labels that are going to come with this if I bring this up to anyone. But I knew I could trust Bob. So that, because these unattached burdens, my experience of them is they're very energetically hungry, and what feeds them is fear. Mm-hmm. So they create a lot of fear to get their needs met and to get their food. And those weren't the only ones. I did a couple sessions with Bob, and some of them they end up apologizing. Like I heard this one that just was like, oh, I did a bad thing here. I'm really sorry. Let me stay around and help. And Bob was like, no, you can go to the healing realms. But it became, his whole thing is like, if you're not afraid of it, it can't hurt you. But so I'd done all of that, and then but I was on Klonopin. I couldn't get off of it. I've been trying to taper off. I was having all these, that was awful. But so I heard that podcast, and then I looked at your website, and I would do the EETs for myself. But I still was afraid because I just was.
Of course. You've been traumatized by a lot of not very helpful interventions.
Yeah. And the other thing, so I had a lot of anxiety then, and I think we either set up the first appointment or something, and I said to my partner, what if everyone on that podcast are fake? Like, what if they're just Dr. Lee's friends or actors that she hired? And my partner was like, that would really be a big investment. Like, are there hundreds of episodes? But that's just like the level of fear that was there. I will say the other thing is I didn't like myself. I had a lot of self-hate, and I had started to do the Buddhist practice of metta, which is like wishing yourself well, but I couldn't say that for myself. It was like, may I be well, may I be happy, may I know peace, things like that. So I would say it for the cast and crew of the show Jane the Virgin, because that show brought me a lot of joy. And the writers of it, I liked the writing. I just liked it. But I feel like that was a moment of kind of setting the stage for the right teacher and healer to appear in my life.
And you traveled, actually. You were in California, and my office was in New York at the time, and you flew all the way from California to New York for the initial evaluation sessions that required some understanding of energy medicine, even though you probably had a good grasp of energy medicine by then. But the way we work with intention and the way we work with connecting to this idea of perfect energy had to be demonstrated in order for a lot of people to really grasp how powerful it can be for healing the psyche, right?
Yeah, and that was my partner had been away, and she came back, and I was like, going to Yonkers next weekend to see a holistic psychiatrist, and she was just like, I'm not even gonna say anything. And then because she was like, it seemed like a really crazy thing to do, and I had to have a really good therapist, and I said to her, all right, I'm going to do this thing, and I need you to like stop me if things get out of hand, because after I'd gone to those, like, after 9/11 happened and I'd gone through those 2 hospitalizations, I'd been ripped off by a psychic.
You were what?
I was scammed by a psychic.
Oh, yes.
So I definitely was, I know, like, I can be influenced and gullible. Like, how do I know this person is for real? Like, I think that having like a solid partner and a therapist who I could be be like, you're going to be like, something weird's going on. If something weird starts happening, it gave me that courage to just hop on the plane and fly across the country. But I'm so glad I did. I think seeing you in person is really important because I got to, is it okay if I talk about what happened in that session?
If you like, this is your podcast.
Okay. I guess if it's too revealing for you, I guess you can edit it out. I just remember you had that picture with the shell behind you, and I saw your lineage as a healer, like into the past, and it made me cry because it was so beautiful, and I was like, this, she's for real. Like, it was such a powerful. It was so important for me, and it was so beautiful to get that glimpse into your lineage. And I was sort of like this thing
interesting
behind you.
When you said that, my whole head was like tingling. That's all. Sometimes a sign that yes, that's true. How in the world did you get that insight? I'm just curious. Were you looking for it? It just happened?
It just happened.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
that shell, the shell that you're talking about in my office, it has some pearls in it. Not perfect pearls, but they're like natural pearls in the shell. And I have it there to remind me that just like oysters can take grains of sand and turn it into something beautiful, that we can turn some of the hard things in life and turn it into pearls for us. It's all symbolic and to just give hope into the environment around us.
Pearl is such an important symbol for me. It's so funny we've never talked about that before. I have a picture of a pearl by my bed that I drew that I look to for support for that reason. Taking the irritant and making it into something beautiful.
Right. I really do believe that is the creative power from within us that is being symbolized by these pearls. So you came into the office, you had an appointment. Tell us a little bit more about your healing journey. What happened from that point on?
It was so fun.
Oh, that's good. I love it.
Yeah, it's just, I was so comfortable. Like, I never in a million years thought I'd tell a psychiatrist about channeling or how much I could hear spirits. And that, I think one of the first things we did was shut that off because some of my ancestors started to have an argument through me as we were doing our intake. It was all of my grandparents are dead, and I was telling you something one grandmother had said, and then my great grandmother heard it and was like, "What?" And they were just so. And so we turned that off.
Well, we set some positive intentions using EET because what I think it was very clear was that you had a hard time focusing on what was in front of you because you were sensing a lot of these other spiritual realms and the spirits were talking and you were sensing them as if they were kind of in the room with you, which is kind of interesting and fun, but then you can't focus on the conversation in front of you. I think that's why we wanted to kind of create a protective shield for you, right?
Yeah, and I didn't want to be a medium. When I first, that stuff started coming through really clearly, and when I was 17 or 18, and I was around people who were mediums that wanted to train me, and I just said, I don't want to do this. But that's to me the heart of the holistic approach. Is that I told you that and you didn't say, oh, well, it sounds like you have schizophrenia too. And, that to me is a real scientist who's open to hearing everything and not shutting the door on stuff.
Well, thank goodness I've had my own spiritual experiences where I kind of know a little bit, just enough to keep me open. I had this one particular patient who was very interested in bringing some negative spiritual entities into our session. And he did that in one of our sessions one day. And I had never experienced it before, but I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, which you read about in books, but I'd never actually felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up until that moment. And I could actually sense their thoughts, their intentions and their feelings and their thoughts in my head, which was all about creating fear, creating control over me, and destroying me. Those three aspects of their intentions was so clear. And then I also experienced what happened when I was praying inside my head for a positive intervention, like a spiritual intervention, because I was like frightened out of my wits when that happened all of a sudden. And immediately upon asking for that support and help, I was surrounded by a beautiful feeling of peace. I felt as if a light was all around me. And then I also felt that I was able to be very connected to inspiration that was very beautiful and pure and very insightful, more insightful than I was, for sure. And it turned out into a very beautiful spiritual experience. So based upon that one experience, like when it was done, I was like, wow, I learned so much about the spiritual aspects of life that when you came into my office and you talked about those issues, I couldn't deny that is possible. But I also saw that it was disruptive in your life, you know, and so we had to do something to intervene to kind of create a nice little barrier so that you can be you and they can just, you know, like be in the background.
Yeah. I mean, it was like having a radio on static all the time. I mean, I'd learned how not to listen to the words most of the time, but it was chatter.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was, and it interfered. I mean, right after that session, I was hanging out with my sisters, and one of my sisters did something that usually would really annoy me. And I was like, oh, those are the ancestors fighting through us. And once I had that barrier, there was no argument to be had. Because I was just like a little bit hurt and annoyed, but it was just like a minor thing. So yeah, it was.
Well, talking about minor things and how things get blown out of proportion, do you think that even before you realized that there were spiritual influences that you could literally hear in your mind, do you think that bipolar, not bipolar, but the borderline personality disorder that is the essence of responding with greater distress than the circumstance warranted, that was happening because of the influence of these kind of negative spiritual influences long before you could hear them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like so much of the description of the diagnosis is trauma. Like it's describing ways that a person would respond in a lot of trauma. But yeah, I think some of it's just my temperament. I'm excitable.
Okay.
And I'm okay with that. But yeah, I mean, there were hundreds of them in me. Like they had different factions of like ones that wanted to leave and ones that wanted to stay. And they were like, well, of course you're not dead. Like we would never let you die because we're punishing you. Like we're extracting a blood debt for things your ancestors did. Like,
so they had traumas and they came in and they were like trying to kind of have an ongoing negative influence in your life to punish you. So there's a lot of trauma coming from lots of different sources.
Yeah.
And not just your trauma.
Yeah, and stuff from my past lives. I mean, I did EMDR therapy when I was in college, and I wasn't sure what I thought about past lives, but in that session, I got to this place where I was like, oh, there's this elevator, and I can take it and go see my past lives. Like, this is so cool. And the therapist was so like, no, don't go down that elevator. We're here to like deal with your intense anger. And it was just another example of like not getting to be a partner in healing. Like I wanted to go check out my past lives. Like, and he was just like, we're not doing this again. This is not what this is for.
Well, for those people who are listening who don't believe in past lives, one of the things that I can say that might be very similar, but is probably more within their realm of, you know, acceptance is the fact that our genes carry so much information from our ancestors, so that the experiences from our ancestors can be felt in terms of the information that we carry in our genes, so that in terms of who we are, we're kind of made out of a lot of experiences, some of them not coming from just a blank slate when we're born. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like that study with the crows where one generation, it is, I don't support what they do to animals for the sake of knowledge. You could just listen to people and learn this, but they exposed them to the smell of cherry blossoms and then did bad things to them. And then it was 2 or 3 generations of crows that hadn't had those bad experiences had a negative response to cherry blossoms. Like they were carrying that knowledge with them.
Right. So to that extent, you know, for those people who due to their religious background may want to tune out because of our discussion about past lives, which, you know, it's when we think about the quantum aspects of life where everything is present and there's no past or present or future, that, you know, time itself is a big mystery. But yeah, we are under a lot of different influences, and it's important that when we're trying to live our lives to be able to focus on the present moment, to be able to be clear about what is yours in terms of your thoughts and your emotions and what doesn't belong there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to circle back for a second. I definitely, when I said like I was worried, I wouldn't tell psychiatrists because I didn't want to be about the spirits, because I didn't want to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. I don't want to like disparage anyone with that diagnosis or that experience. It's a really difficult one. I mean, I've known people with that diagnosis, been in the hospital with people with it. Yeah. And I don't want to be adding to the stigma around it.
Yeah, that is very helpful for you to say. So moving forward, I have some specific questions about how you got off your medications and what it felt like. What was it like to come off the medications, and what was that process like for you?
So I've been on them for 23 years. I've had one brief period where I managed to come off of just Klonopin and Wellbutrin by myself, but I had to go back on them. And I've been trying to taper off the Klonopin for a year, and I've been working with a psychiatrist that understood tapering, and we were going down at 2.5% on the dose a month. But it was not going well, the amount of anxiety I was experiencing. So working with you, like when I heard you on your podcast say, you have to support the biological processes, like before you just take these medications away. And one of the hospitals I was in, when they were thinking I was an alcoholic, I was given this vitamin regimen to make up for the withdrawal from alcohol, which, just to be clear, wasn't experiencing withdrawal from alcohol. But I was thinking, why is there an understanding that, like, in addition to alcohol or other types or drugs would require these nutritional interventions, but then with these psychotropic medications, there's no understanding of that at all. Like the psychiatrist I was working with you before you, like, was really interested in helping people get off meds, but he didn't have any of the knowledge of you've got to replace the damage that was done to biologically. And we did it mostly with energy medicine for a while. Like I think we both were like, oh, how far is this going to work before we have to add in some supplements?
Well, that's because you mentioned to me that you had actually not done well with supplements in the past.
No.
Yeah, so I didn't want to trigger any kind of bad reactions to supplements in you. And so we went ahead and tried to do energy work for you to help you get off the medications. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I also, so when I was reading your website and you said you needed to see people every week, I thought, it's kind of a lot. Why would I see a psychiatrist weekly? But I was so wrong, because it was absolutely necessary to be touching base. And sometimes I saw you more than once a week when things would get intense. The cleansing would be kind of intense and I would need some extra support. Because there were times when the underlying issues broke through, and it was intense at some moments. But it was mostly just shockingly easy, and I felt like, am I cheating here? Because I'd been on Klonopin for 14 years, and I was scared I would end up not able to work. And because you hear these stories of people and not, having years of withdrawal symptoms. And so it was so easy. I mean, there was that time I think I was curled up on the bathroom floor thinking I'm going crazy, and I called you up and I was like, Dr. Lee, I'm going crazy. And you just and I was like, these spirits aren't going to let me escape them, and they're all going to inhabit me again. And you're like, hold on. And you just did some muscle testing. You're like, you're not you don't have them all in you again. You're not going to go crazy. Here's some EET, do it. So I knew I could call you because of someone else on this podcast who had talked about having a panic attack and calling you. So I was so grateful for that I didn't just suffer. And then also, in the past, if I had a panic attack, I'd just take more Klonopin, but you couldn't pay me to take more Klonopin at this point. And there was a time when, as my, neurotransmitters and body was healing, that the medication, even though I was going down pretty quickly, started to be I was a little sedated.
Yeah, we were being too conservative and too slow.
Yeah, the sedated, that's just not a fun feeling. But better that than being manic is worse than being sedated for sure. But,
yeah, and what I noticed was that you mentioned when you came off the medications, your body felt good, right?
Yes, I had this arm workout that I've been trying to do for years, and I couldn't do it with more than holding 2 cans of seltzer, because I just couldn't, even if I did it regularly, I couldn't get stronger. And my body just feels great. It's so nice not to have that sluggishness. I was always a really active person, and when at one point I was on so many meds, the pharmacist would get upset and be like, this is not okay, this isn't safe. And I stopped all of my physical activity because I was just too tired. So to have that back is such a gift, and I've been part of a dance community for a couple of years, and people have noticed how my dancing has changed. I'm just much smoother in my movements than I ever was before. And my stamina is better. I can now use 3-pound weights, not just those little seltzer cans, which I would have to put down halfway through the workout. But it's a scary feeling when you can't get stronger.
Well, tell us a little bit about the ADHD part, because we also had to help you get off of the Vyvanse, right?
Yes. And so one of your guests, Russell, has talked about how the Vyvanse or the ADHD meds kind of call to you. They want you to take them. And I feel that about the Vyvanse. But here's what I'll say. My partner really has wanted me for years to hang a dish towel up in the kitchen after I'm done using it on the stove. And I wanted to do this. But the dish towel would often just end up on the floor. And she would do these dramatic reenactments of how I would just apparently crumple it up and shove it at the stove and not even see what I was doing. And I had talked to some psychologist about this because I had 2 concussions, and I'd done some testing to see if there's anything permanent damage. And I mentioned this, I want to be able to hang this dish towel up, but I just can't. And it was 2 men, and they were just kind of oh, my wife wants that too. So it's just kind of this sexist, don't worry about that. But then after we've been working together, I think for just maybe 6 or 7 weeks, I saw the dish towel fall. I'd never seen it fall. I would just, my partner would be like, there's the dish towel, it's on the floor again. And I'm like, how did that happen? And I was like, gravity, look at that. It's just falling onto the floor. because I couldn't like hang it over the stove handle. So, but it's such a little thing, but it was just something that, right, that this traditional approach was telling me, well, that's not possible. Don't worry about it. You just like, you've got better things to think about, the dish towels, basically. Or this is going to be a therapy goal you're going to have to pick and focus on and do all these mindfulness exercises. And we had just sat and done some energy medicine, and it was better. Like, that was just mind-blowing. Like, I experienced it, and sometimes it's hard to believe it, but it's because we've just been like come up in this world where we're really shut off from the possibilities of I think you've said to me before, like, people don't understand how powerful the mind is, and my mind created a hell for me, but now, like, with your help, it's creating like a person who can see dish towels and fold them.
Oh my goodness. It's the little things that are important, right? You know, because they happen every day.
Yeah, and I don't want to be some person that thinks I'm too good to hang a dish towel.
Yeah. There's one aspect of your life that you've been working on recently, and we've been trying to use energy work to help you. And that is your creative life, your motivation behind the writing. And there were a lot of different things that blocked your ability to really embrace your creativity and your writing. And we've been working on that. So this is more within the last month or so that we've been trying to help you so that you don't struggle so much with just doing what you love. So can you share with the audience the more recent work that we've been working on about you manifesting, you know, your potential in being a creator and how things are going with that?
Sure. So I've written pretty consistently for most of my life. But whenever I achieve some success, I will stop publishing or entering contests for years. That I've missed a lot of opportunities. And so we've started doing work on my sense of self-worth. And that is a thing that when I showed up to therapy 23 years ago, it's something that I wanted to talk about. It's all over my journals, but it got ignored. But what's happened now is, you know, I've been trying to write this book for years, I guess maybe 3 or 4 years, about my experiences in the early 2000s. I got a writing residency a couple years ago to work on it, but I just was having these problems, and in the past maybe week or two, it's just flowing in a way I didn't think was possible. My partner is an amazing reader, and I'm very careful about what I show to them, because they can always find, like, I had an essay that won a national contest and I didn't show it to them because I was like, this is good enough as it is, and they're going to find something wrong with this and they're going to be right, and I don't want to fix it. I'm sending it in. And I won the contest, and then they read it afterwards and said, well, this needed to be changed. I'm like, yep, but it's still won. So now every day I'm like, I have to read you what I wrote today. And they're like, I would read this book. I want to turn this page. So I've been able to, there was, for so long, it was like I was trying to do all this stuff to be worthy of love. And some of that would show up a lot in my creative work, that if I'm just good enough, then I'll be worthy of love. I couldn't have a sense of my own self-worth, like, outside of something I would produce. And so as I have that now. And so I have all this freedom in my writing that I never had before. I'm not doing it to prove a point, to prove I'm worthy of love, to kind of get back at the people who hurt me. Like, it's really become about I mean, I always wanted it to be about healing and forgiveness, but I just couldn't get there. And now I'm getting there, and it's great. And
Wow.
I'm really aiming to publish more, because that's a place where success terrifies me. It scared me.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And when you talk about writing, I'm sure so many people relate that it's one thing to write privately in your journal. It's something completely different to write publicly if one carries the burden of the writing as a method of accessing love and affirmation or revenge against people who didn't treat you well in the past. Once that becomes public, then those issues will definitely block one's creative outlet. But the more we are able to do our energy work and overcome those types of obstacles and write for writing's sake and for the message's sake, I think the more we're going to be able to just be in alignment with the purpose of those words, right? Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Any last words of advice before we finish our podcast today?
I'll say, I mean, I have talked about how fun the energy work was and the positive things. There's some hard moments. So folks should just expect that.
Well, we did do story form, which is your favorite.
It is my favorite. It causes some detoxing for sure.
Yes, it causes a lot of detoxing for not just you, for many people. Yeah.
And then the other thing is really, I've struggled so much with the many diagnoses. Some of them have this huge stigma. But the thing I think is own the things you are ashamed of, or they will own you. I've really been able to embrace the parts of my story that are not just simply me being kind of a victim of a problematic system, but the places I have done some bad things. And I'm able, or not hurtful, I'll say, I'm able to write about that now and just let it be present in my writings, because I don't have to I'm not trying to prove my worth. Yeah, that was own what you're ashamed of, or it's going to own you.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing those words of advice and wisdom. And I've really enjoyed being able to go through this whole healing journey with you. It's so helpful to have it so succinctly summarized in one podcast, right? To see how far you've come. And it's really wonderful to me that the tools that we've been using can be so powerful and yet so simple. They're not that hard to learn, right?
No, it's kind of, I have a little bit of really wanting more people to know about them. What would my life have been like if 23 years ago I'd ended up at the hospital and they've been done a real whole assessment, what's going on with you spiritually? Let's do some energy medicine. You don't want to be in these meds? Okay, we're going to do this another way. It's so powerful. And I wish more people were open to it.
Right. Natural, using the mind, the thoughts to kind of help the body heal, using nutritional support to help the body have the material that it needs to do its work. All of it makes a lot of common sense, I think. And I think it's just that we're programmed to think that medications are more powerful, that they're going to work above, some of these natural interventions. For those people who are listening, I hope that you'll be able to use your influence and share this podcast with other people and let more people know that holistic approaches can be very powerful and very healing, and that this message will be able to reach more people because of you and your efforts to share it. So thank you, Jupiter, for being here today. I really appreciate all the words that you've shared. I'm so happy for you that things have been coming to a positive end, that all of your efforts have kind of culminated in so many beautiful changes in your life recently.
Me too.
All right. So I want to thank everyone for their time and for listening to this podcast. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to this podcast for more helpful information and give a positive review or positive rating for the podcast so that more people will be able to come to this podcast and enjoy the message of hope and healing that I'm trying to share with others. I also hope you'll subscribe to my website, holisticspsychiatrist.com, where you'll find more wonderful articles, podcasts, and links to all my social media platforms. I will say that I'm not much of a social media person, so I do post there, but if you want to reach out to me, go to my website and there's a contact section where you can fill out whatever you want and it will come to me directly and I'll be able to see it in a more timely fashion. So finally, if you wish to integrate high quality nutritional supplements from reputable sources and support my holistic psychiatry practice, please register for Fullscript's free online dispensary that supplies you with the industry's largest catalog of professional grade supplements available on my website under the products tab. I look forward to sharing more insights with you through podcasts and articles and hope you'll thrive as you build your life from the thought up. Thank you very much for listening today. Bye-bye.